This is Power 102 Digital Monday. On a Monday, Karen Nunez, Tesheira, host Hard Talk. Good afternoon, Karen. Nice to see you.
Good afternoon to you, David, and as usual, good afternoon to our faithful listeners. I'm always surprised when I meet people in different parts of in different places unexpectedly, and get such positive responses. So that it's so encouraging to continue to doing the show, and that calypso that you chose. So open up the show has is so relevant today. Must have been sung by Mike Sparrow. I don't know how many years ago, but it is true when you decide to. I don't know if you criticize. I prefer to say critique or to comment on what is going on, and hopefully will allow people to make some informed decisions or informed opinions. It's not looked upon favorably, but that is what Hard Talk is about, certainly on a Monday, and we continue to do that. And I continue to do that with the fantastic support of David McIntyre and the Behind the Cruise team. But especially, I have to give a lot of kudos to David, the feedback that he will give me in any case. So today we're doing a little bit of what the song or the calypso spoke about, um, giving some political opinions on the political landscape, which is what affects all of us, regardless of whether we like it or not, because it's part of our life, in every aspect. So the today I decided to do a sort of a public forum approach, and choose two topics. I think you have the topics and the numbers that you can call, and also really I would ask you to call, but I would like you to call, and also to ask questions. We don't have to give the name. You use a pseudonym, whatever you feel comfortable with. But if you have a question, if you want clarification, if you don't agree, that's just as good. It's good to get an opinion, because we all are entitled to that. And it's good to hear from you and to hear what you think about what we see. So, David, I see you at the bottom of the screen. I'm seeing numbers running. And what is the two topics? You want me to introduce it, or can I?
Well, allow me. Today, we're dealing with the topics of Forex, to devalue or not, and shouldn't the Minister of Finance be included in the investigation of the Auditor General?
Yes, yes. Those are the two topics. I think. Thank you very much, David. And you see the numbers,
Yeah,
and
added to
you
the
can.
numbers. You can send in your messages via YouTube or Facebook. We'll see them here in the studio. And the numbers, let me repeat them for those who are just listening. Our numbers are 222-8255, 222-8255, and 866-525-1099. That's our toll-free number, 866-525-1099. Yes, Karen.
Yes, and yeah, so we decided, at least I decided, yes, have a guest. Yes, it's good to have a guest, and I always like to have someone on the show, and certainly will continue to do that. But there are times when it's maybe a little pause and get you to be the part of the co-hosting, to be my co-host, so to speak. It certainly does give me an insight as to how you think and what you think about what is being said, because there is a quiet or not so quiet now. We're seeing more and more of the unions taking very strong positions regarding the increases in salaries. And of course, the issue is that there's no money in the country. And on the other hand, we're seeing the SRC, the Salary Review Commission, making significant recommendations regarding salary increases for parliamentarians, the judges. I think the chief justice, I want to be on the safe side. The chief justice certainly, and I think there's one other senior person who is also mentioned among them.
The
We're not going to really.
Commissioner of the Police.
Commissioner of Police. Oh, there we are. Lord, it took me to laugh, but of course. Yes, that's good. No, sorry, I don't mean no disrespect, huh?
Neither
But
do I.
I don't want
But
to
it
show
sounds
disrespect.
comical. Yeah.
Oh God, let me. It's very hard not to. It's very hard not to. And I don't want taking it personally on it, but I mean, oh my Lord, you just look at the, because what? Let me just say this because I think I could say this before I go into the devaluation, just as a very broad statement, and you can comment. Nothing's wrong with your view on things. I think when you make a decision to get into politics in a serious way, in a representative capacity, or in a way in which you are on a board that has decision-making powers that affect the country, the social and economic development of the country. Not only the country, but the individuals that make up the country. It's a calling. It's a calling. It's not applying for a job as CEO of a private enterprise. So the yardsticks or the measures that you use, I saw that there was an individual on one of the newspapers that was, I think the headline was misleading. I think because when I read the article, I think what the person was saying is, I think they had developed some what they call key performance indicators, which would be relevant to persons in public service, and to determine what are your markers to determine whether you have met them. What were the things that you were supposed to have achieved? To what extent did you achieve those things? Whatever that might be, whatever depends on the ministry in which you're working, and then how do we determine the success of your performance in that regard? There are some clear indicators of that, but it starts really with why did you go in there in the first place? You've got to understand that nobody wants to make anyone a pauper, but you see, and when people, I know I'm not talking about evaluation yet, but we do have time. When persons make reference to the Singapore situation where um, ministers were paid very, very, very good salaries, one of the reasons was that to avoid corruption. If they paid you well, the temptation to get involved in corrupt activity would be less, because it may be difficult for you as a minister to be surrounded by extreme wealth, and your salary is probably what they make in half a day. And therefore, some people find themselves going down that rabbit hole. But I just want to say that in relation to, and I'm just a general comment, and then I'll move on from it. I do not think, number one, I think whatever the performance indicators that you would use when you're hiring someone for a job, or when you're deciding to promote them or increase their salary, it's not the same performance indicators that one would use if you were in private sector as opposed to someone who is in the public sector. You are in the public sector, okay, I forget about you, nobody forced you. I mean, I always say that, okay, nobody did force anyone, but I don't think that's not the point. The point is, once you've made that decision, then you have to understand that it is about service. And if it is about service, then you have to be very cognizant of the impact of your, not only of your performance, but how it affects the rest of the country, not only seeing how it could look, but also what is happening in the rest of the country, that people stay quiet. That's a very dangerous thing to do, because people can be pretty misleading to you. They may stay quiet about it, but they may be very displeased about it. So I want to leave it at that and hope that good sense prevails and people understand the environment we're living in. And if somebody, I saw a headline, is never a good time, but really, no, really is not a good time to do that. So we move on to the real topic at hand. The first one, I spent some time, not that as much, but you can start putting in your own comments. Do you think we should devalue? So that's the question I have to ask you. Do you think we should devalue? So when we ask that question, what does it mean when we say to devalue our currency? That's the first thing you want to answer. And the consequences, both good and bad, of devaluation. But the most critical thing is the You have to look at it by your own country's social and economic and systems and structures, and where your country is in the context of answering that question, what is in the best interest? Because what might be a good thing to do 10 years from now or 10 years earlier may not be a good thing to do today. So we ask the question, to devalue or not to devalue? And I think what probably started the the discussion, and I think a lot of people felt offended or found it to be insensitive or short-sighted, if you want to use that word. And the reason, I mean, you come up with reasons, but the reason was that we developed a taste for foreign things. Who should say that? A primary school student. A primary school student should tell me that as my answer, not a prime minister. Don't say that, especially when you know what devaluation means. You know the policy decisions that can or cannot be made, or should not be made, in order to affect the devaluation or revaluation of your currency, or not to at all. So, David, we start with saying, well, what is the devaluation? And what you're devaluing your money, your currency, your local currency, in our case, our TT dollars, against what currency? Well, I think the United States, US dollar, still remains king. It is the currency that is accepted all over the world regardless. Yes, you might use euros. Yes, you could use pound sterling. But you're sure that any part of the world, that if you have a US dollar, it is going to be accepted as a form of exchange for whatever it is you are purchasing, whether it is a service, staying in a hotel, or buying a car, or going to a restaurant, or going to the supermarket and buying food, whatever it is, or medication, whatever it is, you are confident that that US currency is globally accepted. And therefore, everybody wants to have that US dollar. And that is what we use in Trinidad and Tobago. And that, generally speaking, most of the demand for foreign currency, is the US dollar. And the issue, of course, is how much do you pay for that US dollar using your conversion of your local currency to purchase $1 US. Let's start with $1 US. How much should one pay for that? And that is where the whole argument regarding devaluation starts. Because if you devalue, to use as like a simple example right now, and then I will talk about the forms of how the currency is managed, the value of the currency is managed. What is the system that we have adopted in Trinidad and Tobago? So, if our currency using the central bank, first of all, we have a legislation, Exchange Control Act. That's one of the big pieces of legislation that governs foreign exchange, which is what we're dealing with. It is through the central bank, and the central bank would then allocate U.S. currency. So if the exchange rate, which is the official exchange rate, and I use the word official because we know that we have a very vibrant, for want of a better word, black market in this country. So if the exchange rate is 670 or 680, it stays at a certain margin. Doesn't let it fall below or go beneath. And there are reasons for that. But let's say that's the rate. If you devalue and now decide that the real value of your currency is not 670, 680, and all the IMF and other respected voices in our country, whether they be economists or former deputy governors, but several voices in this country have said and have stated that our money is overvalued, meaning that if you were really going to actually put the actual value of our currency against the US dollar, which is what you use to buy everything, it should be more in the region of about $10. But is that, and what is the benefit of that? Then you have to ask yourself, but if that is true, what benefit does it give to Trinidad and Tobago to devalue your currency from the official rate of 6 cents and become the official rate of $10 on the black market, the official rate? Well, a number of things are going to flow from that, regardless of your country. And then we look at our situation in particular. What is going to happen, of course, is that you are going to find that what you're getting when if you're exporting, and we are really an energy exporting economy, various whether it is natural gas, petrochemicals, LNG, but we don't refine our oil anymore, selling our crude oil. We're now importing our fuels, so that hasn't helped. But if you were exporting our energy products outside of this country, once you devalue, you will be getting back more in TT dollars. So instead of getting the central bank getting 670 or 680 or whatever it may be, it's around that. Let's say you're getting $10 for each US dollar, which means all of a sudden the country has more money. So if you have US accounts, you suddenly your money in a US account is worth more. But most people do not have US accounts, cannot afford to have a US account. That's a very small minority who will have a US account. So what that means immediately, the money that you have in your bank account immediately is worth less. Why? Because since the key thing with Trinidad, and that is the key thing, is that we import nearly everything that we use. Nearly everything comes from outside of here. And one of the main suppliers, even if it is not United States, it is United States, but even if it's not the United States, the currency of choice is the US dollar. So that you're going to be paying more to bring in nearly everything, food, medicine, cars, you name it, everything is going to increase in price. And once everything increases in price, it means that the money you may have in your account or the salary that you had, which for most people, they have not seen a salary increase since 2014. And seeing WIGAT, which is the West Indian, the university staff. We've seen TNTech, we've seen a number of unions advocating for an increase in salary, saying they haven't seen any since. Some of them saying, at least some, I know for sure, some saying 2014, some say 2017. And if you have not had an increase in your salary, which is true for most, then what you would just see is, since nearly everything you are consuming, even your fuel now, that we used to produce here through our refinery, even the fuel that we're going to import, whether it's gasoline, kerosene, diesel, whatever it is, every single thing is going to go up in price because you're going to be paying more to buy that same thing, because now you have to pay $10 instead of $6.70 for that thing. That's assuming you are one of the 13 entities in Trinidad to whom US is allocated. Once you are paying more, and that is the persons who are selling goods, or you buying any goods, automatically it's going to affect your purchasing power. Because while your salary, if you're working in government, your salary may start to look better. Well, actually, it won't look better. It will be the same. But for the government, from the government's point of view, they have more money because your salary has remained the same, but they have more TT dollars because they are getting more TT dollars for their oil, their energy products, than they were making before. So they have more money and for the domestic market to meet their domestic obligations. And one of the biggest obligations the government has in terms of recurrent expenditure is salaries. That is number one. Salaries, whether it is to the public servants or whether it's to the state enterprises. So on the face of it, the government is in a better position to meet its expenditure, its obligations. But on your part, that is the country, the individuals, your salary has not changed, but the cost of living has. So what it has done, it has reduced the purchasing power of your dollars. So whatever your salary was, if it was $5,000 or $10,000, what you can now what have to pay for the same product before the devaluation is going to go up and go up. And let's just and the risk, of course, in that is that if you try now to increase salaries to keep up with the increase in the because of the devaluation, then you're starting a vicious cycle in which the economy now is at risk of inflation and a risk of real economic disruption because it is trying to keep up with the cost of living by trying to increase salaries, and it becomes a vicious cycle. So the devaluation benefit, which would be mostly for the government from that point of view, would be lost because I hardly think they would increase salaries, but there might be pressure on them from the unions to increase their salary because they're saying, well, listen, you're getting, you know, 40% more, or whatever, or 30% more for your energy product than you will before you devalue. So you have more money to now pay us better salaries. And that starts a vicious cycle. So the devaluation has that benefit, I suppose, if you look at it in a very short-term way of giving the government that money to be able to meet its local obligations, which mainly is paying salaries to, because they're the major employer of individuals in this country. The other side of devaluation, which is supposedly the positive side of devaluation, but when you look in reality, for our situation, is it a positive thing? Devaluation would mean that the cost, you make yourself more competitive in the sense that persons wanting to purchase goods that you manufacturing sector they produce, when you look at the exchange rate, they are going to end up paying less for that same product that they did previously because your value of your money has been reduced. So it is cheap, because your goods become cheaper. In a lot of countries with the right macro and a macroeconomic environment, it does work. England has done that. Other countries have done that. In our case, if we were to devalue, where would the benefit come? I already spoke about the impact on the oil and gas, which is our major source of our foreign exchange earnings, and where that would end up going to pay salaries, which would then could set off a trend for an increase in salaries, and more importantly, your purchasing power of your dollar will be, if you will be pauperized, really. You can become pauperized, really. And therefore, because your purchasing power has been effectively reduced, because everything that you are consuming or buying is coming from outside, is being imported into the country. And coming back to the advantage of the exporting, making your exports more attractive. I mean, we're not talking about the energy sector, we're talking about the non-energy sector. Much of the inputs into creating a manufactured products, much of it is there, as one economist mentioned, he called it the intermediaries. Maybe it's the corn that we don't grow, the red beans that I don't know that we grow, the black beans that I don't know that we grow. I'm using those as examples because that comes immediately to mind. The tins that are used into which they're packed, the paper to produce the labeling, and all that. Much of the raw products or much of the intermediary products that produce that so-called export product is imported. And therefore, whatever advantage you may have initially gotten by saying, well, I'm going to devalue because it will make my goods cheaper, in the end of the day, it really won't make it cheaper, because what you're really doing is a lot of the input into your manufactured product for export has increased because much of the input is imported, and if it's being imported, that means if the exchange is changed, if there's a devaluation, it's going to cost more. And so the advantage of devaluing to make your product, your manufactured sector, your non-energy sector more competitive would be lost because of that fact that we continue to rely so heavily on inputs from abroad for finished products. And so when the Prime Minister started by saying, it's because we have developed a taste of foreign goods. I mean, I mean, you can't be really be serious about saying that. There are ways that you can deal with that. How about reducing the number of franchises that are operated in this country? There are far too many. I'm not saying it shouldn't. I've said it so many times before, but I say it again. And if you could have some of them operate, because I don't see what value, what we're getting as they pay their corporate tax and so on, but at what expense? At the expense of using our foreign exchange, because these franchises are from abroad. They are foreign franchises, and the foreign franchises do not take, at least I am not aware that, they accept our TT dollars in order to set up a franchise or operate a franchise or whatever arrangements or agreements they have to pay the holder of the franchise abroad in TT dollars. I think you have to pay them in US dollars. So I don't know what advantage it is to have this. We are, we are just being flooded with every kind of American, mostly American franchises. You could go here and you could feel you're in Miami. You feel like you're in New York because all the franchises you see there, we have them here. And we don't only have one, we have many. And the problem with that is whatever employment it creates, it certainly is not inflation protected, meaning that they are low income jobs that are created. And if you were to devalue, not only would it eat into the salaries that you are paid, so it makes it even transportation costs, whatever costs you have, clothing, whatever other costs, food costs, all of these other things, they're going to increase. The cost of it is going to eat into your dollar, into your salary. So I don't see the advantage to this country when the Prime Minister says we have a developer taste of foreign things. Well, you have a part to play in that. Why grant so many franchises, or why not create a special tax bracket for those franchises operating, or put a ceiling? You look at the population size, and you look at the non-communicable diseases that we have in this country, which is very high: diabetes, cardiovascular. Much of that is caused by lifestyle, and lifestyle includes lack of exercise, but a large component of it is what you eat. And much of what those franchises offer is saturated fats, processed, a lot of processed foods. I am not saying don't have, there are people who like it. I'm not against, I don't want anyone to say that don't have any. I'm saying we cannot afford to have the number that we have. And if it is a problem of us having foreign taste, we need to address that. And one quick response to that is the same way banks have been closing down left, right, branches, left, right, and center. All the big banks have closed down major branches. Won't call the name of the banks, but we all know that all over their big branches have consolidated and become smaller branches. And they have done that the same way they've been able to find a way to save money and to create more value for their organization. Trinidad is our organization. The Prime Minister is the Chief Executive Officer and Chairman of that organization. And if he's saying we have a taste of foreign goods, then he has to do one of the things. And if he's saying, as we know, that we're importing $7 billion worth of food, then we know that one of the answers to that simply is to reduce the number of franchises that are allowed to operate in this country. My understanding also, too, I am subject to being corrected because I didn't get a chance to recheck it, But my understanding is that I think it was one of the economists who mentioned that in one of the articles I read very recently. When they give you the price of a product, is the distributor's price. That's not the retail price. So they will give you the distributor's price because they are the one distributing the product. So they are like the wholesalers. So, and that is the price that is used and to determine in the terms of the economy how much you're paying for those goods. But in fact, it is when that product is then sold at the different enterprises, where we have the supermarkets, etc. That is not the price that is paid by you and me. That's not the price. The distributor's price is not the price that the retailer who is selling that product is putting it at. And that again affects us because the more they have to pay for that product is the more it's going to be passed on to you. So I would say that the Prime Minister, I don't know if you have anything you want to say as I talk on the matter, but I would say that the issue really is not a question of and it's clear that we have a problem. So don't say that we don't have a problem. It's not just a question of foreign exchange for our taste of foreign goods. All the banks have reduced the amount of foreign exchange that you have access to, and we have huge state enterprises with massive bills, which the government appears to be unable to meet. So I think what we really wants to say is that the reason why that conversation about evaluation has come up is because the economic situation in the country has not been managed in such a way that we have developed other sources of foreign exchange earnings. And it has resulted in an extreme shortage of foreign exchange. So even if you were to devalue again, another point is that even if you were to go and devalue, it is not going to solve the problem. Yes, we've always had a black market, but this black market now is going to be driven very much more so today by a foreign exchange shortage. And since the small and medium, and these are what the economists say, cannot compete with the 13 entities that were published as having allocations of foreign exchange at the rate of 670 or 680, whatever it goes between. They don't have that access to that. How are they going to pay for the goods that they have to import? Even if they are going to use those goods to create something and produce something, they're still paying part of it, what you call the intermediary cost. How are they going to compete? Because the foreign exchange is just not there available formally. So you are going to then feed the black market. So even if you were to devalue and devalue to $10, and the allocated companies were now paying 10 to the US, and I gave all the reasons why we shouldn't, because of the reason both on two sides, from the export side and whether in fact it makes sense. What do you think is going to happen if it's a shortage and these companies that are competing and do not have the kind of resources to compete on an equal playing field, don't even have an equal playing field? What are they going to be forced to do? Are they going to go out there and buy the foreign exchange on the so-called black market? So you'll be paying $10 for those if you were to devalue. But all those small and medium, which is where you're trying as a government, your responsibility as a government is to create as much as possible, deal with economic inequalities, to give everybody a fighting chance to become a successful entrepreneur, successful in his or her own right. But if you are competing with the 13 who are getting it at one rate, even if it's $10, do you think they're going out there in the black market and paying $10? Of course not. They're going to have to pay more. So it becomes then a vicious cycle. They might have to end up paying $12 instead of the $9 they're paying. I understand many places, I was told today by someone, There are places on Charlotte Street. They call it nearby, I won't call it, but I'm sure it's true about many other places. They're willing to pay $9 for your a US dollar, and this is when the exchange rate is 670 or 680. So if you pay $9 now, can you imagine if you were to devalue? So how will devaluation? In fact, the person most impacted in a negative way by devaluation are the small, medium, and micro enterprise in this country who cannot compete with the allocated 13 companies who get it at the managed float rate. And therefore, one or two things can happen. And this makes you kind of, it makes you a bit cynical, because then you say to yourself, well, it might be in their advantage because they're paying 670 or whatever it is for the US dollar, but they know everyone else who is trying to break into the market or keep their business afloat or build their business is not paying that. They're paying $8, $9, $10, and if you devalue, then it goes up and goes up and goes up. And who is the winner? If you leave it as it is at 670 as it is now, or 680 as it is now, people are willing to pay $9, $10 for the same US dollars that they are getting at 670, 680. So what does that mean? It makes the playing field even more unequal, because they are able to purchase those same things and import those items from abroad using an exchange rate of 670 or 680, and you trying to bring in the same thing and you have to pay $10 to bring it in. So right there, the inequality is there. And either those persons who are getting it through the official channels can either tempted, where they win anyhow, because if they keep it at their rate and sell their goods using that as their starting point, obviously the price they're already going to make a bigger profit. They make a bigger profit even if they don't increase their price of their goods to the $10 rate. They're still making a profit because they're able to sell, but they're selling and buying goods at the 670 rate when you have to buy it at the $10 rate. So their markup or their price differential is going to be greater than yours. And if they were to decide, well, you know what? Why must I sell my goods at 670 when most of the persons who are in the small, medium enterprise, micro enterprise are paying $10? I might as well start pricing my goods at $10 too. So, I can only see the only winners. The valuation is obviously something that is recognized by the IMF and a number of economic pundits, that our money is overvalued. But how do you deal with that? What is the answer? What is the answer to that? We have allowed a situation, I think, to reach a point where the government, well, it's in its last year, just last year, of course, that's what I think. Last fiscal year. Lord, we don't know what lies ahead for us, but that's where it is now. Well, even if we look at the situation, you have to understand too, this situation that we're looking at, where it is being fueled by a shortage. It's a shortage. It's not that the country is doing so well and there's so much demand for foreign goods and people want to buy these foreign goods, and therefore, the money to buy it is available. We have the US currency, and that in itself could push up prices, because if you have a lot of US currency available to you, there's a temptation that you could charge, enormous prices for things that people will still buy because they have the money to do it, right? But that is not the case here. The case here is that is not what we're looking at for the valuation here. The reason is that there is a shortage. There's a lack of foreign exchange. There's a lack of that. You see that from the banks. They're giving you $2,000 US a month as your thing. And even if you go in the bank, I mean, I'm sure everybody will tell you, if you are the man in the street or the small man, as they say, you go inside there, the number of things that they require from you in order to get how much? $200 if you're lucky, because you better come there very early. And when you come early, it might have been sold out. So
mm,
our foreign exchange situation is really a consequence of a significant foreign exchange shortage. And part of that shortage that we are experiencing, this foreign exchange shortage, is because one, we have relied almost solely on the energy sector. In 2015, our foreign exchange reserves were a little over $10 billion. Today, it is more in the vicinity of 5 point something billion. And so where has that foreign exchange gone? Because that foreign exchange has to be used for something, and it's being used to purchase goods and services from abroad, but you're not seeing on the other side of the equation, except in the energy sector, which is in decline, you're not seeing, on the other hand, an export market outside of the energy sector that is sufficiently vibrant and sufficiently resilient and sufficiently successful that we do not have what we have today, a crisis of foreign exchange shortage. And and that shortage that we're talking about, going from in 2015 to 10.5 to 5 billion, how did we reach to that point? By just relying on one product, which is the energy sector, which is in decline in every area: natural gas, LNG, petrochemicals, crude oil production in every area. And then, to make matters worse, we have to actually import fuel, and that is eating up our foreign exchange. And what also um, creates part of the problem is that that foreign exchange that we have, that 5 point something billion, half of what we had in 2015, which was 9 years ago, it is really represents a lot of debt. All the economists have said so, because in order to, it's you holding up a country with debt. Just imagine if you run a business, and in order to continue to spend, you are doing it and financing your obligations by taking on debt. This is what has happened. So the foreign exchange we have, and why we say it's financing by finance by debt, because the bonds that were issued on the international market, and you are uh, your payments, the payment, they have the coupon, which is the interest rate. I think it's once a year, maybe more than once a year. But definitely, the end of the period of the bond, you're paying everything in US dollars. And what the economists have said is that if you were to subtract the debt that we have taken on by issuing bonds, which is to raise money by to pay for what? Let's see what it's being paid for. If we were to take it away from what we see as our foreign exchange reserves, according to one, I mean, I think it's a shock. You'd probably end up with next nothing in your foreign exchange reserves if you had to pay off the debt. So that foreign exchange reserves that we talk about is really debt that we have taken on by issuing bonds to meet expenditure. And that is part of the problem where the shortage has come about, which is why I guess we are Standard and Poor's just has us one notch below junk bond status. They said if we continue this way, they are going to rate our sovereign debt, which is the currency, our debt that the country takes on, and raise it downwards. What does that mean? What does that mean? It means that any foreign investor is going to think twice about investing in Trinidad and Tobago, because what it is saying, when you reduce your sovereign wealth um, rating, it's really talking about your ability to pay back your debt when the time for payment becomes due. So we have a situation here where we are talking evaluation, not just because our currency is overvalued and therefore we're paying um, our export in our non-energy sector is not competitive, but we are really talking about a situation where we have put ourselves in a circumstance where we have a foreign exchange shortage. We don't have the money.
Hmm.
We
Tell me
just
something, Karen. Is it correct to say that the government is responsible for the crisis of the foreign exchange by I was listening to a conversation that related to back when the opposition was in power, and that they had eliminated what they call the auctioning or the bidding process for the US dollar. And I am wondering if well, they said the reigning uh, government, the government that is in power now, they maintained that elimination process, and continue to peg it at 680 US, and there's what they call um an artificial shortage. I've been hearing talk like that. I've been trying to understand this auctioning and bidding process for the US dollar before they eliminated that process, back in the days when the UNC were in power, when they came into
right.
power.
So, from my understanding, is that the auction we have a floated managed float. I keep reading floating currency. If we had the floating, just pure floating, like Jamaica and Ghana had, that means a free float. And what you are doing now is allowing market to determine the value of your currency. And the negative of that is, of course, is that no foreign investor, if today, 1 minute, it's 20 Jamaican dollars to the US, and then a week later, it's 50 Jamaican dollars to the US. So for investment purposes, it's having your currency floating freely, which is what Jamaica and Ghana did. Ended up not being such a good thing because it created a lack of certainty for a foreign investor that he didn't know what his rate, what his the rate of exchange would be, and what his profit margin would be, because there was no guarantee that if he invested X amount, what his return would be. So the managed float, which is what we have, and you talk about the auction. I've looked at the central bank as a whole section. I think Mr. Ewart Williams, when he was governor, did a whole thing on securities and looked at the different mechanisms that are used in order to determine, I think, what should be the going rate for the TT dollar. And the one that has been used and is still in use is the managed float, which means that the central bank, when the TT dollar is falling too low as against US dollar, they inject US currency in order to keep it at a certain level, so that it stays within a bar, so that that is that crazy certainty we're talking about, and has allowed us for the last how many years, as you would note, to have the exchange rate, the official exchange rate, stay within that bar of maybe 630, maybe up to 670, but it's really not moved. It certainly hasn't gone outside of that bar, and that's because of that managed float. You manage the float of the dollar, you let the dollar float, but when it's reaching a point where the exchange rate will, because it'll be already overvalued, they inject foreign currency into the market, which it did recently, I think in May or June of this year, when they injected, I think, 500 million US, because the foreign exchange reserves was slipping so low in a matter of a few months, starting from the beginning of this year, that they injected money to keep it afloat. My understanding, the auction process, it is to allow a greater participation of persons in the allocation of US dollars, but it's also to be utilized as a means of determining what the market is prepared, like how you auction off anything, goods that you might have. You might start at X price, but you might have a price at which you will not go. I can't remember the terminology they use in auctions, but when you put out something out in auction, you already have determined, yes, you're prepared to sell it at X price, but there is a margin at which you will not go, and therefore that's how far you are prepared to allow the exchange, the dollar, the TT dollar against the US dollar to be exchanged. So I think the whole idea, it was a two-tier system, as my understanding. It was introduced in 2011 under the former administration, under the former government. Was my understanding. I read an article on it, and then I think it was abandoned by that same administration. But my understanding of it was, is used in a lot of African countries, is used in a lot of developing countries. It's used, the two mechanisms, the two ways in which it operates. But the idea behind it is really to determine what is the actual value of your currency against the US dollar. And by auctioning, you put in a bid, and you can either do it individually or you can do it through the bank or through an agent, and you will put in a bid for X amount at a certain rate. And I think there's a bar by which your bid has to fall. And once it falls beneath that bar, you are out of the picture. Once you are within the bar that was set and by the central bank, I believe, then you might be allocated X amount. And that means you are freeing it up and not just limiting the allocation of the US dollars to 13 predetermined predetermined entities, as is the case now. So I think the auction system, which is used with advantages and disadvantages, it's used mostly in developing countries, and it is used to try to fix what is the rate of the market, that is the local market, is prepared to pay for for the US currency. And so they allow not necessarily individuals, but companies or businesses or banks acting as the agents to put in their bid for them, to bid for that foreign exchange. And I believe the idea was, I rang the central bank today to try to be able to answer that same question. And maybe, I wasn't surprised. I wasn't surprised because it's so unfortunate. You're just trying to get information to be clear. And I did call, and I will say that I called 3 times. I was told to hold on when I said I wanted to just try to get a better grip on this issue. And I just held on and held on until I eventually put the phone down. And then when I tried to call back, it says something about something is blocked. So I couldn't get back in. So I don't know if they don't want me to know. I'm just telling them right now, whoever from the central bank is listening, I called today and I tried to speak to somebody. I just wanted to be able to understand it better so that people can understand the thinking behind the auction system, because I don't think it was ever intended to replace the managed float, but it was intended to use it alongside, just like how we have the Exim Bank, which is a good thing, which is a window that the government developed actually years ago in the 1970s or even before that, here, where you'd have a window where you could purchase foreign currency, but must be for export purposes only. But I think the amount has been reduced from 30 million US to 25 million. I don't know, per annum, per month, or whatever. So that they created a special window because they recognize that if you want to deal with foreign exchange reserve shortage, you've got to give exporters, persons who can earn foreign exchange, an opportunity to address what is essentially the shortage of foreign exchange, because so much of it is done by way of consumer, which there's little or no return to the country on it. And you read articles, I don't want to call the names of the persons, But if you read Sunday Express and Opinions, at least 2 articles that deal with this issue and are very harsh in what they have to say about how this matter has been dealt with. And essentially, you will find that the economists, it really comes down to mismanagement. And, the mismanagement of the economy. Why did we have to reach here? I asked someone who lives in Barbados, who was in a very senior position and lived in Barbados, has been living there many years. I said, well, how come you, because someone mentioned, which is true, that Barbados has a fixed rate of exchange and they have stuck it. They said the reason they did that, there was a time they were going to, there was really a movement to let it float and not keep this 2-to-1 rate. And I said, no, the unions, the private sector, the union decided to take a cut in pay. They decided not to ask for increase in salaries for these 5 years. In other words, everybody came to the table with the objective that they all had something to lose as far as they were concerned if the Barbados dollar did not remain its fixed rate against the US dollar. So there was a cooperation by the unions, private sector, the government to do whatever they needed to do because it reached a crisis point. And that is what my understanding is why they were able to continue to. We don't have that in Trinidad. We don't have that. Same thing in Jamaica, where they said enough is enough, where they have been able to bring down their debt profile. Well, they had an extended facility arrangement with the IMF. But what started it was that the government of the day, which is no longer the government, it was under, then Holness became the prime minister. But even while they were still the government, all the politicians, all the political parties, the unions, the private sector, the public sector, everyone came together and said enough is enough and were prepared to do what was necessary, not like what they did in the 1970s, which nearly destroyed the Jamaican market. And I think the IMF learned its lesson from putting too many harsher measures. But the point was they were able to get the country to come together under the heading enough is enough, and were able now from 2013 to bring down their debt from 144% of the GDP, all the goods and values produced in that particular year, to now 73% in 2020, half in it. Our own is 74%. And what that means is when you carry out so much debt, it means you cannot grow your economy, you cannot develop your economy because you're spending all your money paying debt. And that's what we do in Trinidad. That foreign exchange that we have and the money taken out of the HSF, 18.2 billion TT dollars since 2016, has been used. If you use a review of the economy of 2023, that's what I had looked at. You'd say it tells you it is used to meet current expenditure. And that's just another way of saying it's not used to develop new revenue streams. So, and that's why we continue to have what we call fiscal deficits, with your expenditure being, except for 1 year, fiscal deficits, your expenditure being far more than your revenue that you project for the fiscal year on the tax year projected for that year tax year. And how are you financing the expenditure? By borrowing and going into the HSF. And that is why even your inflation rate, we don't have low inflation, we have stagflation. That's because nobody's borrowing. Only person doing anything is the government. Why? Because they don't have confidence in the economy. So people are not borrowing because they don't know what's going to happen next year. They don't know if they'll have a job next year. They don't know if their salary that has not gone up in how many years is going to go up and cannot go up because of the state of the economy, right? So if you have any question as to why we are where we are, it's really as not because we have a taste of foreign goods. That is a minor part of it. And why we have that, you have to ask yourself, who allowed it to reach to that point? Who allowed it? Is the government allowed it to reach to that point? What they should have been doing is developing other streams of foreign exchange, because in that 2023 report, they actually took parts of the agricultural industry for export. They didn't just say to reduce our import of food, actually using it to earn foreign export. foreign earnings. And one of the articles I read used the example of coconuts, that in some countries they're making millions and millions and millions of dollars from using coconut oil to make soaps, to make different products, because that has become the in thing, all these natural products. There are so many opportunities, and it won't happen in one year, but they've been there 10 years. And why we are in the condition we are today, where you have 0.4% inflation, that's stagflation. That means nobody is buying. Nothing is happening in the economy. And if you doubt that, there's something called the repo rate, which is what the bank, central bank, in using it as a monetary tool to encourage either to take money out of the system when there's too much money and therefore feeding inflation, or if they want to put money in the system by reducing the interest rates that banks borrow from them so that people will borrow. And then, if people borrow, then the economy starts to come alive and so on. They have left that repo rate at 3.50 for the last 5, 6 years. And that's an indication that people, they are not able, the central bank is clearly signaling to us that they can't increase the interest rate, the repo rate, the interest rate, because they want to get people to borrow from the banks and they're not borrowing. The central bank themselves said too that people are saving, but they're not putting their money in the banks. Where are they putting it? And why are they not putting it in the bank? Part of it is the part of it would be the fact that the banks charge a lot for a number of their services. But then you also question, where is the money coming from, that they are not able to or not willing to put the money into the banking system. And that's what the central bank has said. So we are looking at 0.4% stagflation, where there's no borrowing going on except in the bank, except from the government. You're looking at a situation where the state is owing billions of dollars. Tech is owing $6.16 billion to National Petroleum. The state enterprises owing Tech over $1 billion. We're looking at WASA with 140 million. So there's debt upon debt upon debt upon debt that this government has incurred in the face of the reality of the energy economy, which the production is not there and it won't be there for a long while if it ever reaches where we want it to reach, and then you don't have control over prices. So we are in a case state where we are, where if you look at all the other indicators that these economists will you look at, I saw one of them say, I don't want to hear what they're telling you or the story they give me. I want to look at the data. And that data will tell me the story of what is going on here. So I would say, ending on that point, the reason why we would not encourage a devaluation of our dollar, because the disadvantages far outweigh the advantage in devaluing a dollar that is already overvalued, meaning that if you really were to put the actual value of our dollar against the US currency, which is the currency that we use, most countries use, we would find that we would be paying maybe more in the vicinity of $9 for US currency. But will that help our economy? Not with deficits, not with low inflation rates. The productivity would be affected too, because then people would not, the manufacturing sector, if you were to devalue, the cost of producing goods would increase, therefore their market share might decrease, therefore their unemployment rates would increase, therefore we already have low productivity in this country. So there is just a knock-on effect, knock-on effect, knock-on effect. So I think I have
Karen, before you complete the topic, it's kind of confusing for some people on the ground, especially because I hear them talking, and people are wondering if it's because 2025 is an election year, while the conversation of devaluing is sort of uh, put under the carpet. Let me take this call in the meantime. Good afternoon. Hello.
Hello, good evening.
Yes. Good
good
afternoon. How are
evening.
you?
Yes.
I'm fine.
Uh-huh.
Okay. You call to contribute to the program?
Yes, I should have eaten my cricks instead.
Go ahead and make your contribution.
Lovely. So my 12, I have to list 12 Christmas carols.
Mhm.
Okay, Deck the Halls. Is that okay? Everyone right here? Away in a manger.
Well, I
I
think
think on the wrong shoe.
yes, I think you're calling into the wrong program. We are at Power 102. Probably you're linked up with Boom Champions.
Oh my gosh!
But
I am
that's okay.
so sorry.
That's all right. We're glad for your positive message, because we just did some doom and gloom
Oh
here.
my! I am falling for the cricks promotion.
Oh no.
But we're still glad to hear that you have a positive outlook as we go into this Christmas season.
Of
And I
course,
hope that you are
and I was
successful.
ready to lift my 12 carols.
Well, not on the show though, but we would like to hear it on maybe whatever station you were supposed to get it on. I'm sure they would be very interested in hearing what your 12, is it
Carols.
12 what? 12,
Christmas carols.
12 Christmas carols. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay,
But
thank you.
thank you. Bye.
Bye bye. Yes. You know, I've been here to talk about precautionary demands. You know, people making precautionary demands on the banking system. Let's say someone needs 5,000 US.
Mhm.
They'll apply for 10,000 US. You know, precautionary demands as I try to understand it. Um, 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 where the black market thing is concerned, I on my phone I got a post saying on the Joint Select Committee there was a discussion about people who purchase U.S. or foreign currency from family members who would
That's
come
all.
home for Christmas, right? And it was made quite clear that that could be going or that could be breaches of the law based on the act, and they term it to be a breach of the law. You're breaking the law.
Yes,
But on
sir.
the other hand, they're saying that there are black markets all along Charlotte Street and all that, putting up signs saying we are buying for foreign exchange or foreign money, dollars, be it US or pound sterling or euro. They are buying it. And people are going there and accessing it. So, it's difficult for the man on the ground to understand how they are saying that there's a scarcity of the US dollar. Let's stick to the US dollar. There's a scarcity, but there are lots on the streets, you know, um, and very precautionary demand is. And there's also what I hear about preferential accommodation for certain entities to have US.
Okay, so that's a lot of things that you said there. One of the things
Yes.
that I find, I suppose there may be something in the exchange control legislation at one time where, I mean, at one point in time in our foreign exchange position was dire. It was, I think, I don't want to exaggerate, but I'm sure it was something like 35 million or something like that we had in our foreign exchange reserves. It was that bad.
Mm.
How many years ago? So that is where the exchange control would have been extremely strict. But that there's something that would not make sense to me is because many countries, and Trinidad is becoming one of them. It didn't used to be, but we are becoming one of the countries where remittances play a great part for persons from family living abroad, and they're able to meet their expenses here because they are sent US dollars from abroad by family members. And that is something when you're looking at the GDP of a country, it is actually factored into, just as how you would factor into the manufacturing sector, you would also factor in remittances. Guyana at one time was one of the countries where remittances played a large part, a very large percentage of their GDP, the economy, and was was reported on officially and formally as part of their GDP. It's so true for Jamaica. At one time, we used to have reverse remittances. In 2008, I remember that, where we were sending out money because there was no issue with foreign exchange at that time. So I'm not sure that that whole thing about selling, maybe it's there somewhere, but I'm sure that I'd be very surprised if anyone tried to enforce that, um, because the system is so unfair to begin with. And I'd have to be pointed to the exact provision in the legislation that says you can only, I know they set up the Bureau de Change, those bureaus that we have, to encourage people not to go the black market so that they will sell it, the US, to these bureaus at an increased rate rather than sell it on the streets of Charlotte Street or wherever it is. But this is going on for years. And the fact of the matter is, I'm not telling anybody to break the law. I would want to see exactly what part of the act says that if you were to do that, that somehow, and what would be the penalty for doing that. And I think no government, and whether you're facing an election or not, in this Boba season, would want to come down hard on people, especially those who are at the medium, small, and micro enterprise, the lower, they're voting, a large part of the voting population, and persons most affected, that they would come down on them. It's just simply not so. I mean, you are not driving up they are not the ones driving up the cost of US dollar. It's the system that's doing that. So fix the system, and then people won't. You may continue to have some level of black marketing, but it will be reduced. There are some countries where it's not there at all. I was watching someone make a presentation, and they said, they used St. Lucia as an example. They said there's none of that no, they may be wrong, but they are businessmen, and they were pretty confident about what they were saying. And we know, for example, that there was no black market. There may be other things going on, but no black market for the US currency in St. Lucia. And similarly, well, we know definitely not in Guyana. And that's because there's no shortage. What is driving all of this is the shortage. And where does the shortage start with? It's mismanagement of the economy, the endless deficits every year, the borrowing until you can't borrow anymore, the failure, in spite of every indication that the energy prices were not only, the price was not only going down in a downward trajectory, but the production simply was not there. The Prime Minister himself spoke about this since 2019. The Minister of Finance has spoken about it, and I mean, you fix the system. This is a system that is so broken, and a system that allows only a certain percentage, and we won't call names, but they put the names of the institutes that have the access to the foreign exchange. Something has to be done. And they say, if I remember, what is the yardstick? Because someone wrote an article, and I thought and that's what I think, and I have agreed with. We need to find, how do we determine the allocation of foreign exchange? Should not there be not just the Exim Bank window, but should not there be, in terms of allocation and who gets an allocation and how much allocation they get? Should it not be based on how much foreign exchange they are able to produce and return to this country? Because that is what is consuming our currency. Why has it dropped from 10.5 to 5 point something? Why has it dropped? Because we are consuming it and not replacing it. And not only not replacing it, we are not earning it. The only place that you're seeing foreign exchange being earned that we know of officially is the Heritage and Stabilization Fund, which is an investment vehicle in any event. That is what they do. So you have to ask yourself, I don't think that, and I don't want to be to say that currency chair is encouraging anybody in any kind of what is going on, but has it not become a necessity? Where are you to get the foreign exchange from? Where there just isn't any foreign exchange, and the persons to whom it is allocated is limited to 13 entities, And I think they use as the rationale is the amount that the size of their business. Could you imagine the size of the business? How about what is the kind of business they're in? You know? So I think that thing, they've got to show. I know they say something in the Exchange Control Act, but I doubt very much. I mean, how are people going to survive? The government, we're very good at turning a blind eye. And if persons have to go to, and collect US dollars that their family sends from New York or Brooklyn or Canada or whatever parts of the world they send it, and they take that currency and they go and sell it to get as much as they can from that in order to live in Trinidad, in order to pay their bills in Trinidad, to pay the electricity bill, to buy their food, to take care of their children. That is where the government has made people rich. Why does the government not take responsibility to a large extent that we are in the place we are in? Because it definitely, a large part of our problem of this shortage is the failure to develop other streams of foreign exchange earnings, and also the dependency on our energy sector over which you have no control over price, which is volatile, and where the production simply is not there. It is not there, and it won't be there for quite a long time, especially now with the United States, with Mr. Trump making it very clear that he won all these swing states, 9 swing states, and part of the reason he was successful, in my understanding, was that he's bringing back jobs to America, and that he's taxing, whether he could do it or not, but he said it, that the goods that they're bringing from China, which is really their major, they are the major competitor, from what I understand, imposing huge tariffs on their goods. So it is the government that has to take control over the foreign exchange shortage, stop borrowing to pay recurrent debt, develop foreign exchange reserve, and so on. I think something has gone. I'm seeing myself, but not. I'm seeing myself, but not on your show, though.
Yeah, I'm seeing you with a different picture.
Yes, that is my picture on. That's my picture on. That's my picture on Facebook.
Oh,
I don't know how that happened.
neither do I. Now tell me something, Karen. While you're still on the topic,
Why did you try to fix that?
yeah, I don't know. I cannot fix it from here. I think,
yeah, that's a strange thing that just happened.
yeah. Tell me something. Can the government implore where tourism and cultural tourism and the different types of tourism? If you could inspire and motivate the people and give them avenues like marketing avenues and all of that, we can surely accumulate more US dollars or foreign income, if I should say, through those kind of methods. But we see that isn't happening at all. Question is if the central bank was an independent entity, how do you think it would have panned out?
Well, the legislation is clear. I think Section 50 says that policy directives, that the Minister of Finance can give policy directives to the central bank governor, and he shall comply. Of course, if it were different, you would have something like what applies in the United States, or what applies even in Jamaica, in the sense that in United States, you have the Federal Reserve, but the Federal Reserve chairman, his appointment has to be confirmed by the Senate. So it is not just the President of the United States that determines, but it is the Senate that has to give the confirmation, just like the judges of the Supreme Court.
Mhm.
And in many other developing countries, what they do in order to put a sort of a, I don't know if you want to say control or management in place in how the economy is managed in terms of accumulation of debt, accumulation of deficits, the way in which the money is spent, how it is spent, if in fact it is spent on what it says is being spent on, if it is spent within the time frame that you see it being spent on, in fact, and starting with what is strategic objective. You have an economic advisory equivalent of an economic advisory board, but their own is governed by legislation, which I spoke about, I think, on this show, or in 2021, they passed legislation and it's called the fiscal, I can't remember exactly the terminology, but a commission. And the commission is independently appointed, and the funding for it is given to it by Parliament, not by any ministry. And it appoints a committee, and the committee has certain their functions are very clear, and among their functions is to monitor the government's fiscal policy reports, what the government says it will be doing for the next year, to critique it, to give advice, to give recommendations, and also to monitor those recommendations, or to monitor how the government is performing, and also at the end of the fiscal year to publish for the public an independently independent it's not the committee itself, but I get they get an independent organization or audit company to then provide an independent assessment of how the government has performed during that fiscal year, with the guidance and so there's a pair of eyes, not to tell the government what to do, but certainly not to let the politicians do as they please, because it is politically in their interest, but not necessarily in the interest of the country's development. And it was passed, I think, in 2021, and it has been heralded as one of the reasons why they were able to cut their debt by almost half in a matter of a few years, relatively a few years, given that they had reached as much as 200% of GDP. It's kept steadily coming down until last year, I told you, it reached 73%. Our auditors think it's 74%. And a lot of that has to do with how you manage debt, what you spend, what you spend is on where does the government spend its revenue, how it is spent, and in other words, a lot of more accountability of an independent. But it is, the good thing about it is, of course, it's not left to the minister or the cabinet to disband it, which is, I think, the Economic Advisory Board. I don't know if anybody disbanded it. All I do know is that there must have been frustration, because the persons that were on that Economic Advisory Board, which had started in the first term of this government, and I thought it was a marvelous thing. Slowly but surely, in a matter of months, it fell apart, because one after the other, members of that board, which was totally voluntary, but made up of really experts in all the areas, resigned. So it fell apart. But now in Jamaica, as is in the case in many developed countries, they have the equivalent of that legislation. I wish I had the name of the legislation in front of me, but they have the equivalent of that legislation, which sort of keeps an accountability of the government to the people, and is independent because it is funded independently, and it is governed by legislation, and it reports to the parliament as to the areas of the development and the areas in where the government has succeeded, has failed, and so on. So there's a fresh pair of eyes looking on at the government's performance.
If 2025 is an election year, we can expect all kind of politicking, if I should put it simply like that, because I don't like to get myself too much involved in talking politics. But if we have to see a turnaround, because things are really bad on the ground, people complain all the time. Mr. Jackman is saying devaluation will only bring about hardships and we need to increase exports. Okay, so we
Yeah,
need to
that's what
increase
he's saying. Yeah,
exports.
that's
Um,
what it.
yeah.
Everybody says so. That's been said year after year after year. I wasn't going to call it, but Ralph Mirage. I mean, sometimes Ralph Mirage, with due respect, sometimes can be pretty harsh. But I will say that you cannot question that he has been singing that song for years now.
Mm,
I have said it. Many people have said it.
yeah.
You've got to increase your export. It's not a hard science. So you're asking what they could do in a year? What they could do in a year is not pass the finance legislation, campaign financing legislation. Well, they don't, and they have good reason why they won't, because there's so much things you have to do to implement it. You have to set up special registry. I mean, they can use that as their reason, or this been around for how many years. I don't know if it before a public one of those special committees now. I don't know if it's before one of them, but it's based on the Jamaican model, which they enacted several years ago. And what they just do is finance the campaign as they have done in every single year, and it has worked. Unless you people see there is a chance of a leadership which will do what is necessary. The Not just talk the talk, but walk the walk. They'll just do what they do all the time. They have their financiers. Their financiers benefit in obvious ways. I don't need to say what it would be. It's obvious you're not going to put your money unless you're getting a benefit from it. So obviously that is what will happen, and that's what they will do for the next year.
Do you think they will
Hmm?
improve? Do you think they will improve the incentives or increase incentives for oil investors and people who are into exploration of oil reserves and wells and all of that?
Yeah, but that was something. For instance, Mr. Jackman is there, and we had him on the show from OWTU, and I asked him the hard question: what was that piece of paper that the minister waved around, saying that it was fraudulent? It was fraud. That saying that they had gotten a financier that was willing to put 1.5 billion for the bid, and he said that never formed part of the formal documents that were put forward to the to bid for the refinery. But yet, with good theatre, he waved it around, and it made it seem, according to what I was told on the show, and Mr. Jackman, I see commented, so he's probably listening to what we're saying right now,
Yeah.
and gave the impression that that was what was happening. But look at the facts. You have to look at the facts, and I went through that. For example, the bids for the deep water bids. There's the onshore bids, and the near, I don't know the terminology, near shore, but there are three categories of bids. All of them are closed now. But in every single one of them, I know for the deep water, I think there was 17 bid rounds, and only 4 of them were taken up. Every single one. And this was under the heading investors. When you go to the Ministry of Finance, their website, they have under in the thing investors. So they were targeting investors to invest in the development of these various gas fields and oil fields. And obviously, there's greater risk in the deep water rounds, but then there's the more the onshore, and then there's near shore bids. And in every single one of them, the results were disappointing. I don't think in any of them did they get 50% of the bids taken up by the investors from abroad. So if you're asking me what are they going to do, they tried. The ministers sitting in Parliament and telling you why Shell has not made a final investment decision for Dragon Fields, because they're still doing seismic work and they're still doing this kind of, what nonsense you're telling me? That thing in Dragonfield, Venezuela was working on it. I think I said 2011, but it might be 2011, 2017. But they've been working on it, but they ran out of money. And the reason that Venezuela, Shell, which is a major investor in that Dragonfield, has to make a final investment decision, and they have not done that. And the time for OFAC, giving them the chance to develop the gas field, the Dragon field, to provide us with natural gas and pay for it in cash, which was the 2 years that OFAC gave us, which is a sanction. That's the sanctions part of OFAC, right? It's coming to end on the 31st of October next year, and Shell has made no final investment decision. And they probably won't now, especially now with Trump there. If that's what Biden was only willing to give them, and Shell asked for 15 years and they didn't get it. So what is he talking about? They're still doing work and they're still doing seismic thing and they're still no, minister, it's not that they're doing that. Why don't you talk about OFAC? Why don't you tell us about OFAC? Why don't you tell us why Shell asked for 15 years and work turned down? Why don't you say that the issue with regards to Dragon Field has a lot to do with not putting money in the hands of Maduro, right? Because sanctions, a major sanction tool or weapon, is starving you of foreign exchange. Why would they put money in their hands? Especially when America now is one of the largest exporter of LNG, is going into shale production. So why would they do that? Just tell me. I'm telling the people the other day, so I saw on a report, as if they're still doing research and doing this. I had read something from PDVSA on their website when they talk about Dragon Field in particular. They said that 91% of the initial infrastructural work had been completed. That's where I got that, I can't pull it up now, but I saw it there. It said 91% of the infrastructure. So what are you talking about? And on top of which, to answer your question, most of these investments from the international companies like Shell and BP, it's for LNG. It's not for the petrochemical industry, which is where the money is, where the value added, where you go up the value added chain. That's where you make your money. It's LNG, it's almost like the raw product, the liquefied natural gas. And most of it, when it is mined from the ones that they can mine it from, the gas fields, they can mine it from in our waters, which is the Manatee component and the Coquina, which is BPTT. The large percentage, the vast percentage of that is going to the LNG. A lot staying in Venezuela because they had it in their gazette. So whatever is not the profit, but whatever the income generated, 45% minimum must stay in Venezuela. And then they have published, I don't think it was the Minister of Energy said it, but I saw it either in the Central Bank report, but I read it somewhere in one of the official reports, that even when they start actually monetizing, bringing the natural gas to be able to reach to the Trinidad waters, that's the Dragon Field, or the other ones that are in our waters, the initial amount that you will get is 100 million cubic feet per day. And it will take some years, I read it, take some years to reach 350 million cubic feet per day, 300 million of which will go to LNG, which means it goes outside the country to the, which is the Shell investment, right? So even if they do it, how much is it going to benefit us in production when the production that we need as we sit and talk right now is 1.4 billion cubic feet per day less than we need? And I'm talking about millions that they're talking about, much of which is not going to add value. It's going into LNG. So I don't know what can they do. I don't know what the answer is. But they should have known that long time, because the writing was on the wall a long time ago. The writing was on the wall. But for whatever reason, as persons have read, have said, I don't know why. I know, but they seem wedded in locked in to the energy sector to an extent to which they can see no further than that as a means of earning foreign exchange, and it's just not doing that. And what has to happen for you to recognize that? it means that you're going to have to do the work to develop the other streams of foreign exchange earnings
Yeah.
that Trinidad and Tobago is capable of.
Well, now, the other part of your topic for today, you have about,
We
about
can't get to it. It's 10 minutes.
yeah. You want to talk a little bit about it before we can?
Yeah, but it's not much I could say now. All I would say is that, and it's really doesn't do justice to the topic at all. I would just say that I think we could sum it up because we don't have time to discuss it.
Yeah.
What I would say is that the application that was made by the Auditor General for judicial review of her of the decision of the Minister of Finance and the Cabinet to set up a investigative committee was obviously frowned down upon by the Privy Council, and we know that because of some of the comments that Lady Similar made, and which is what we can't go into today, is she kept asking, why isn't the Minister of Finance part of the terms of reference? Because the fact of the matter is that he set the terms of reference. He went to the cabinet, from my understanding, and judicial review is you're asking the court to review the decision and this would be a decision of the cabinet to appoint an investigative committee whose terms of reference in itself is questionable. And I had brought that up on other shows. And there are various grounds upon which you can question the bona fides of a decision of a public entity, because it has to be a public entity or authority to make a decision, and therefore you ask the court to review it. And one of them would be apparent bias, acting ultra-vires outside of your authority and acting in a manner that is non-motivated, questioning the motive. So in her case, she apparently would have been questioning the setting up of the judicial review, asking for leave for judicial review of the decision of the cabinet led by the Minister of Finance to set up an investigative committee to look at for the understatement of the revenue for 2023. And that in itself is worrying. How you came to a conclusion that she is an understatement? That is the first thing that I question. How you come to the conclusion is an understatement. And then the involvement of the Minister of Finance himself, he initiating the investigation, he selecting the team, he determining the terms of reference, and he is assuming that he will take on the remuneration, his ministry will pay for the remuneration, and that they must send a report to him. Now, why would he want to do something like that? Well, the judicial review, why she would have been fairly not hard for her to get the leave for judicial review, which the Court of Appeal did agree with, except that Lady Similar added the other parties. Why isn't he part of it? And that was a good question. And I'm looking forward to the written judgment. And the reason why judicial review leave is usually granted is because the threshold for granting leave is pretty low. And the test they use is there a realistic possibility of success, that if you get leave, that you will be granted it, and therefore the matter, which he's questioning, why have you set up this investigative committee? It brings you to ask the question, why? Well, you can't help but wonder why. Well, the why would be he couldn't, unlike the central bank governor, who does not have that constitutional independence. 116.6 of the Constitution says we set up the Auditor General's office, and then you have the Exchequer and Audit Act. Clearly says that the Auditor General shall not be subject to the control or I have the language here somewhere, but anyway, he's not subject to the control, shall not be subject to the direction or control of any person or authority. So immediately, the Minister of Finance couldn't do that. He couldn't dismiss her because it insulates her just as it insulates the DPP. But you can remove her. And you can remove her under 136. How can you remove her under 136 of the Constitution? Well, you set up a tribunal. And the tribunal can be set up by the president. Who elects the president? The prime minister. The president, on her own initiative or on the request of the prime minister, can set up a tribunal. And 136, I think 9, or one of them anyhow, says that this section, which deals with public officials, applies to the Auditor General. The grounds for setting up the tribunal for the removal, which would be the removal of the Auditor General, is set out in 136.7 of the Constitution. And it says, for disability of mind, physical disability, misbehavior, or the catchphrase, or any other cause. So how do you get to setting up a tribunal? You can't remove under 116.6. So it makes you wonder, well, who is at blame? Who is to blame? Who is to blame here? And why wasn't the minister in the terms of reference? Because when the initial report was sent to her, which she's required to do under both 116.2 of the Constitution and under Section 9 of the Exchequer and Audit Act, the Auditor General's job is to ensure that the statement of revenue, expenditure, etc., just like any auditor, is she's satisfied that you provided her with the documents, the vouchers, and the proof. It says so in both the Constitution and in the Act. So when they sent her the report on the 31st of January, one can forgive the minister, who's also the Treasury, for getting the misstating the revenue by 3-point-something billion initially, and then they came down to about 2.6 billion. But when you said it in January, you sent it, but that was the deadline date actually, sent it to the Auditor General, whose job now is for the next few months, 7 months, I think, until April 30th anyhow. She has up till April 30th to then go through everything and make sure she's satisfied that the documents there's proof of the expenditure, proof of the revenue, and so on. You recognize in March, because your permanent secretary in March wrote to the Auditor General telling her that you discovered an error. And the error is 3-point-something billion, but you can't verify 780 million of it, but you could verify 2.599 billion of it. So you wanted to amend the statement of revenue to increase the revenue from 61 to, I think, 63 billion. On who says so? So then you have to ask yourself, where at that point in time, after January, why did the Minister of Finance not take it upon himself to find out what went wrong that could have caused such an error? They said it was something with electronic payment. But she did, and this is the last thing I could say, is two things. One, when she gave in a report, as she's required to do under the Constitution 116.4, once she has completed it by the 30th of April, which she completed it by the 24th, the Constitution says on the 116 that at the next sitting of Parliament, the Auditor General report must be submitted to the Parliament, to the Minister of Finance, which is the Senate and the House of Representatives, and the Minister. But in it, she had a disclaimer. And in her disclaimer, she said she could not, I was unable to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence to form an opinion on whether all revenues had been fully accounted for and included in the public accounts. I was unable to determine whether any additional adjustment might have been found necessary with respect and recorded or unrecorded revenue. As a result, the completeness and accuracy of the actual revenue could not be ascertained. That audit procedures were hindered as supporting documents were not provided to verify payments. As a consequence, the expenditure of, I think is 1 billion, could not be verified. So when she put that disclaimer in her report that she sent it on the 24th, and the law says at the next sitting, you must put it late before the Parliament, that is when the Minister of Finance pushed a resolution to delay the laying of that report, when in fact you asked for delay before the 31st of January, when you know you won't be ready on the 31st of January. But I guess when he saw that, that was enough to say to him, he's not laying that. But what I would say, and it is soon after that, that pre-action protocol letters were sent, then this investigative committee set up to investigate, and the terms of reference of the investigative committee, which I have in front of me seems to be coming to the conclusion that there was an understatement, and let's find where the understatement. How about finding out why did the Ministry of Finance or the Minister of Finance, after the 31st of January, not determine what was the cause of the understatement, and where is the evidence in support of that unidentified? Because, this is the final thing I have to say, is after they went after for the and set up the this tribunal, and she has to leave for judicial review. Under the Exchequer and Audit Act, Section 25(4 is not, they don't have any say in it. Section 25(4 allows the Auditor General to file a special report. It's called a special report, which the Parliament must lay, setting out her report as regards to the audit report. And when you read it, she gives about 12 reasons why she was not satisfied. She talked about documents not being signed, no evidence of being monitored, no adjustment audits signed by the Controller of Accounts to authorize changes. The accounting officers on no certification by the accounting officer on documents examined. She went on about 6 or 7 reasons why she was not satisfied in her special report. And she ended by saying the ineffective internal audit absence of a management oversight may have contributed to non-compliance with legislative requirements of the Exchequer and Audit Act. So she has said, why must she say that? So why didn't the Minister of Finance, when he did not know, given the 31st of January, he didn't know. But by the time he got his PS to write in March to tell her they made a mistake, why isn't he not asking his Controller of Accounts, the head of the chairman of the Board of Inland Revenue, all the various departments which fall under the Ministry of Finance, why were these documents not monitored? Why were these documents not signed off? Why were these documents not certified? Because that is what the Auditor General needs to get from you under the Exchequer and Audit Act and under Section 16(2) of the Constitution, to be satisfied of what she has in front of her. It can be verified because you have given her the evidential proof of it. Why isn't he not asked to be part of the terms of reference to answer those questions? Instead, it looks like it seems like it's looking to set up a situation where you will get an investigative report that may very well end up in a negative towards any other cause, whatever that means. And you can't help but think that might have been a motivation. So I'm waiting to see what Lady Simla has to say on it. So I quickly tried to show that 25(4 of the Exchequer and Audit Act gives her the right to submit an audit report. And I would invite everybody to go to the Auditor General's website, and they will find the special report set out in detail the reasons why she could not sign off on it initially when it was presented to Parliament with a disclaimer, which he did not want, I suppose, to have it laid before the Parliament on the 24th or 26th of April, whatever date it was. She gave the reasons, and it's on her website. So you will find out for yourself, not me, why she felt that she had not been provided with enough vouchers, certification, whatever, with the requirements of the Exchequer and Audit Act. They were not complied with by senior members of the Board of Inland Revenue that falls under the Minister of Finance. And he certainly had a chance between January and March, when he got his permanent secretary to write up and say they made a miscalculation, to find out all the things that she said were not done that she put in the special report. So for that reason alone, he should have been part of the terms of reference.
I hear you.
You understand? I hope I've been clear.
Yes, you.
Yes, and I would invite people to go to this Auditor General and see what she said in a special report, which, by the way, she's not fighting us, she's protecting us. That's why you have auditors. It's the public accounts of the country of Trinidad and Tobago, and the legislation, Constitution created that office, and the Exchequer and Audit Act says that is what her job is, and that she must be satisfied both in the Constitution provision and the Exchequer and Audit Act provision, that she must be satisfied by vouchers, by certification, That's because you could tell me anything. And then she's redundant. You don't need her. Just take what they say. And it's not that you don't trust them, but that's your duty. And she wanted to provide and do her duty. And she was not given the independent certification and evidence to be satisfied that the information she was provided with was reliable. And by the way, the last thing, the central bank governor did agree to meet her, but in the letter he said she could not examine the electronics system, which he said was responsible for the fraud. Secondly, they said she did not write, but it was one of her senior officers. But if you read the legislation, it says she or someone authorized by who can request the information. But she was denied, she was allowed to come and see him, but she was not allowed to send a senior audit person to look at the electronic system that they are saying, electronic clearance system they are saying was responsible for the error. So that is why terms of reference needed to include, if you really want to find out what went wrong, you have to bring in the minister.
Correct. We gotta go, Karen.
Oh Lord, anyhow. Okay. I'm sorry we couldn't really get into it the way I would have liked to, but I hope I was clear enough.
Okay. Maybe we can try on another date.
Okay. I'll take care. I'll see you and your listeners another day.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Right.
That's Karen Nunez Tesheira on Hard Talk on Mondays right here at Power 102 Digital.